The moment the man in first class collapsed, the entire plane seemed to lose its breath. 1 second, the cabin was filled with the ordinary sounds of a mid-flight routine, soft engine hum, the faint clink of plastic cups, the rustle of magazines, and the next, a sharp gasp sliced through the air like a warning siren. A tall, well-dressed executive in a charcoal suit stumbled in the aisle, one hand clutching his chest, the other reaching for the seat backs as if they were the last solid thing in the world. His face turned an unnatural gray, his lips trembling as his knees buckled. Then he fell, hard, right there between rows, as overhead lights reflected off the polished leather of his briefcase that slid away like a forgotten promise. And in the row just behind him, a little girl froze with wide eyes full of fear, as if she already understood what the adults around her didn't want to admit. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one good heart to change an entire destiny, then please take a second right now to like this video, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this remind us what humanity still looks like. The flight was heading from Chicago to Seattle, crossing long stretches of quiet American sky. Most passengers were business travelers, half asleep behind laptops, or families trying to keep kids calm with snacks and cartoons. But the collapse turned everything into a sudden storm. A flight attendant rushed forward, her voice trembling as she asked if there was a doctor on board. People leaned into the aisle, eyes darting, fear spreading fast like spilled ink. A man whispered that it looked like a heart attack. Someone else said maybe it was low blood sugar. Nobody knew. Everyone was scared. Except one person. In economy, near the wing, sat a single father named Caleb Hart, a man with tired eyes and hands rough from work. He wasn't rich, and he didn't look important. His jeans were slightly faded, his jacket was cheap, and his shoes had that worn-out bend that only comes from years of trying to stretch every dollar. But his gaze was steady, alert, the kind of look a parent develops when life has forced them to stay ready for emergencies. Beside him sat his son, Noah, 8 years old, clutching a small backpack and a comic book. Noah had that quiet bravery children get when they've seen too much too soon. Caleb didn't hesitate. He moved down the aisle with urgency, asking people to step aside. Years ago, Caleb had worked as a volunteer firefighter in a small Indiana town before life took a harsh turn. He didn't have a medical degree, but he had learned how to keep someone alive long enough for professionals to take over. He knelt beside the collapsed man and checked for breathing, pulse, responsiveness. The CEO's eyes were half open, unfocused, as if he was already slipping away from the world. The flight attendant returned with the emergency kit. Caleb's voice was calm, commanding without arrogance, the way it becomes when fear is too expensive to entertain. He asked for space. He asked for the AED. He asked someone to time the compressions. In moments, the plane's aisle became an emergency room made of carpet and courage. The man's daughter, her name was Grace Whitmore, about 10 years old, stood frozen beside her seat in first class. Her hands shook as she gripped the armrest. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at her father like she was trying to hold him upright with her eyes alone. That kind of fear isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the fear of a child who knows the world can break in 1 second. Caleb glanced up and saw her. Something in his chest tightened, not from panic, but from memory. He had once watched his own wife, Marianne, fade away in a hospital bed, and he remembered what it felt like to be powerless, to be a witness to tragedy. He didn't want another child to carry that kind of scar. He worked fast. The AED pads were placed. The cabin fell into a tense silence broken only by the flight attendant's shaky breathing and the machine's cold instructions. When the device advised a shock, people flinched as if lightning had struck inside the plane. Caleb followed through, then continued compressions. Sweat formed at his temples, his arms burned. But he didn't stop. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, like a miracle sneaking through a crack in the sky, the CEO coughed. His body jerked as air forced its way back in. His eyes blinked, confused, frightened, alive. The cabin erupted in relief, soft sobs, stunned murmurs. A few passengers whispered prayers. Someone covered their mouth with both hands, shaking. The flight attendants moved quickly to stabilize him. The captain announced an emergency landing in Minneapolis. But Caleb didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled, slow and heavy, as if releasing something he'd been carrying for years. Grace, the daughter, finally let out a sound, half sob, half breath, and collapsed into her seat. Tears poured down her cheeks like she'd been holding back a flood with sheer willpower. Her eyes met Caleb's across the aisle, and in that moment she didn't see a stranger. She saw the person who had pulled her father back from the edge. When the plane landed, paramedics boarded immediately. The CEO was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, oxygen mask over his face. His hand reached weakly toward his daughter, and she clung to him, refusing to let go until the paramedics promised she could come. She looked back once, one last time, toward Caleb. Caleb returned to his seat, trying to act normal, but his hands trembled slightly. Noah stared at his dad with a kind of awe that felt bigger than words. Caleb just ruffled his son's hair and told him everything was okay, even though his heart was still pounding like a drum. After the emergency landing, passengers were rebooked and delayed. Caleb and Noah ended up in the Minneapolis airport, sitting near a window that showed planes gliding like silent giants. Caleb's phone buzzed, work messages, reminders, the constant pressure of being a man who couldn't afford mistakes. He was traveling to Seattle for a construction job interview that could change everything. Rent was overdue. His car needed repairs. Noah's school fees were piling up. Caleb had been carrying life like a heavy box with no handles. That's when a woman approached him. She was elegant but not flashy, her expression sharp yet shaken, like someone trying to hold composure together with threads. She introduced herself as Vivian Whitmore, the CEO's sister. She said her brother, Richard Whitmore, had asked her to find the man who helped save his life. Caleb tried to wave it off. He said anyone would have done it. Vivian didn't smile at that. She said not everyone would have stepped forward. Not everyone would have stayed calm. Not everyone would have given a terrified little girl a future where she still had her father. Vivian offered to pay him, a reward, money, a large amount. Caleb refused. He wasn't trying to be noble. He just knew what it meant to accept money for something that felt like the bare minimum of being human. And deep inside, he knew if he took it, he'd feel like he sold a moment of mercy. Vivian studied him for a long time. Then she said something else, something that shifted the air between them. She asked why he was traveling. Caleb didn't want to share his struggles, but the exhaustion in him was too deep to hide. He told her the truth. He was a single dad, trying to rebuild his life, trying to give his son something stable after losing Noah's mother. He said he had an interview in Seattle, and he couldn't afford to fail. Vivian's expression softened. She left for a moment and returned with a card, not just a business card, an invitation. She said Richard wanted to meet Caleb personally when he was stable. She said Richard was a man who didn't forget debts, especially ones that couldn't be measured in dollars. Caleb took the card with hesitant fingers, not expecting anything. He had learned the world rarely gives gifts without strings. Still, he thanked her. 2 days later, Caleb and Noah reached Seattle, exhausted from delays. Caleb went to his interview, wearing his best shirt and a tie he'd owned for years. He did well, but the manager hinted the company had already chosen someone else. Caleb walked out with that familiar ache of disappointment, feeling like he was running uphill on broken legs. That night, in a cheap motel, his phone rang. Unknown number. Caleb answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was steady but weakened, like a man who had stared at death and returned with new eyes. It was Richard Whitmore. Richard didn't waste time with small talk. He told Caleb he owed him more than thanks. He told him he had watched the security footage from the flight, seen the fear on his daughter's face, and seen Caleb, an ordinary man, turn into the reason his daughter still had a father. Richard said he'd built his empire believing power was everything. But in that aisle, powerless on the floor, he realized power meant nothing without people willing to save you. Richard asked Caleb to meet him. The next day, Caleb entered a glass tower in downtown Seattle that looked like it belonged to another universe. The lobby smelled like money and polished stone. Caleb felt out of place, like a man who had wandered into a dream meant for someone else. Noah stayed close to him, eyes wide. Richard met them in a private office high above the city. He looked different from the man on the plane, paler, thinner, but alive in a way that suggested gratitude had rewired him. His daughter Grace sat nearby, coloring quietly, but her eyes kept lifting toward Caleb like she needed to confirm he was real. Richard stood slowly and held out his hand. Caleb shook it, unsure what to expect. Richard didn't offer him cash. Instead, he offered him something far heavier. He offered him a job, one that paid more than Caleb had ever imagined. Not as a token, not as charity. Richard said he needed people around him who didn't panic under pressure, people with integrity. He offered training, stability, benefits, and even help with housing if Caleb relocated permanently. Caleb's throat tightened. Pride and relief collided inside him. But then Richard said something else that made Caleb's eyes sting. Richard told him that Grace had stopped speaking much after the flight. She had nightmares. She would wake up crying, asking if her father would disappear. But when Richard told her the man who saved him was a dad traveling with his son, she asked to meet Caleb. She wanted to see what courage looked like up close. She wanted to believe the world was still safe. Grace stood up and walked toward Caleb slowly, like a child approaching sunlight after a storm. She held out her drawing, a picture of an airplane, a man kneeling in the aisle, and a little girl with tears. Above it she had written, in shaky letters, "Thank you for my dad." Caleb knelt to her height, his chest aching. He didn't speak in grand words. He simply told her she was brave and that her father was going to be okay. In the weeks that followed, Caleb's life began to change in ways he never thought possible. He moved into a modest apartment in a safe neighborhood. Noah started a better school. Caleb worked hard, learning the corporate world while staying true to himself. Richard, once cold and distant, became strangely grounded, like a man who finally understood what mattered. But the greatest change wasn't money or comfort, it was Grace. Richard enrolled her in therapy, but he also did something deeper. He started showing up. He stopped missing her school events. He started eating dinner with her. He started listening. And every time Grace felt fear rise in her chest, she remembered the man in the aisle who didn't run away. Caleb never tried to replace anyone. He didn't become their family. He didn't seek attention, but he became a steady presence, a reminder that strangers can be angels in disguise, and that kindness can rewrite the future. One rainy evening months later, Caleb sat at a small table in his apartment, helping Noah with homework. His phone buzzed with a message from Richard, a photo of Grace smiling at a father-daughter charity event, her hand in her dad's, both of them soaked in rain but laughing. Caleb stared at the photo for a long time, his eyes wet, because he understood something now. He hadn't just saved a CEO. He had saved a little girl's childhood. He had saved her from the kind of loss that changes a person forever. And in return, without even asking, life had finally opened a door for Caleb and Noah. Proof that goodness doesn't always go unnoticed. If this story is touching your heart, please don't stay silent. Comment right now. Kindness wins so we can see how many people still believe in humanity. And before this story ends, I want to ask you something from the heart. If this journey moved you, if you felt that lump in your throat, if you believed for even a moment that hope still exists, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and your engagement tells the world that kindness still matters. Because sometimes, one stranger's hands in the middle of the sky can change a child's fate forever.